Really, it's just no pressure,
So, where we started? The government's evil, or?
I mean, yeah, I guess do you want to talk about that, or you want to talk about something else?
How do you usually start these things?
Yeah, I usually just start with the proposition. I explain my reasoning, and then we just go from there.
So it's
Sure. So, I believe that government is evil because I believe in the non-aggression principle. I believe in the self-ownership. I believe in property rights. I believe that there is no good argument against. There is no good argument in favor of aggression. There is nothing that morally justifies aggression. And when I look at the government, they are the embodiment of aggression. They act through extortion. Every single law is backed by violence, or else it's just words on paper that mean nothing. So that's one thing. The second thing is the utilitarian aspect of government is that I don't believe that anything they do is helpful, efficient. It's always wasteful. I support free markets. I support less government. I prefer no government, but we can get there if you want.
I can't. I'm very excited.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah, definitely. Generally, I just think that the government is just terrible in terms of utilitarianism, and they're evil in terms of a priori deontology, of the idea, the principles of self-ownership, property rights, etc.
Okay. So, I have a question for you. Your ideas and principles. That was just annoying.
Too much traffic here.
Yeah, way too much traffic. So, of your principles of self-property rights, I have to ask you a question. Where do your rights derive from? All throughout human history, regardless of whether you're looking at, ancient Neolithic peoples, or you're looking at modern day society, what has shaped human history from now to the end of time is the formation of power. Humanity has always one goal in mind, and that is the formation of power. In this case, we would start with the kingdoms that we once saw before in medieval Europe, across the world, the Middle East, and even across Asia. We would see various different kingdoms of food control and supply. That's how government first got its hint. We associated it because we didn't want the responsibility of dealing with it with ourselves. The reason being is that we don't have the means to deal with it by ourselves. We have come to a society that, look around you, has created all of this. These roads, this sidewalk, everything you see here. Just a moment. With all that being said, governments have been corrupt for many millennia. There is no such thing as an uncorrupt government official, and you are right in some instances that there are very significant instances of wasteful government spending. That being said, the free market often does come with its limitations and its problems, such as the most famous instance is healthcare. It is no question that American healthcare is some of the most expensive in the world, and granted, it is some of the best, but it is also very expensive. But you compare that with that across Europe, they all have a universal system. They all have a basic universal right to free healthcare, no matter where you are, no matter what conditions you have, no matter anything. In America, that is not the case. A single ambulance ride in America from a private organization, not government funded, will bankrupt you.
Yeah, it's expensive, yeah.
Way too expensive. Everyone often claims that the free market is often the best as it possibly can be, but we have the free market system. We have it open to our eyes. Okay. And here's what happened. We are paying way too much for this healthcare. If I get hit by a car today by crossing this street right now, I'm going straight to a hospital, and thankfully I'm insured. I will be fine. I have healthcare. I have insurance to cover me. If I didn't have insurance, I would not be able to afford my bills. I'd be indebted to you, and the only way to be, not you specifically, but whoever would take me to their hospital, whatever, and the only way to pay them back or to ensure that they get their guaranteed right to their money and services would be the use of threats and extortion or any other means of violence, as you previously mentioned. Yeah. There is no escape from this. So it's either a collection and monopoly on violence that we authorize and give to a single entity that we support and represent us, or we disassociate and break ourselves apart and allow that violence to continue unabated with different clans and groups that will eventually reform themselves to reorganize.
Yeah. So there's like a lot of points there that you laid out.
Yeah. I have a very grand strategy to go on. Grand scale thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. So I don't. Let me think like where to start. Okay. So you brought up where rights came from. You brought up.
I probably sound way too
No, it's okay. No. I just that you said a lot, so I have to like backtrack so I can respond. Like,
So if you want to break down point by point.
yeah, because you said because you also brought healthcare, and that's a whole other topic. Okay, so where rights come from? We can start from there, and then I could respond to the ones about like healthcare and like roads and all that. So how I derive rights is a priori. Do you know what a priori is?
No.
So a priori just simply means that truth is derived through logic, through deduction. It's like it's true by logic. It's true because like 1 + 1 = 2. You know.
Right, but
Not all logic is universal. Logic is often subjective. Even if it's corrupt and wrong, not everyone follows the same logic. That's assuming that humanity in and of itself is a non-corruptible form of person. Their logic can be distorted by many different factors. So it's not really fair to say that logic can dictate our rights.
So when I bring up logic, I'm looking for truth, right? I'm looking for like an ethic that is true, in the sense like that we look at facts. There's like facts and there's like ethics. I look at facts in the same way I look at ethics. You know, there's facts that are true either because they're logically true or because they're true because we observe them in the world. I look at ethics in the same way as like it is true by logic, and the law of non-contradiction says that if two propositions are a contradiction, then the contradictory statement must necessarily be false. Yeah, so I look at ethics as a for me, like, I am after the truth. So the way I derive rights as like a priori, as like a universal truth, is through like a concept developed by Hans Hermann Hoppe. He's like a Austrian economist philosopher. He brings up the argumentation ethics, and what argumentation ethics essentially says is that when you and I argue, we implicitly presuppose a norm that of a peaceful norm, and when we argue, we are trying to solve a conflict. Now, there's two ways to resolve conflict: either through war, we could kill each other, or through debate, settled through argumentation. However, when we try to make arguments in order to pursue truth, we are essentially saying implicitly that we would rather prefer a peaceful way to settle dispute rather than killing each other. Now you might say, well, what if I said war is justified? Well, you see, this statement is a contradiction. Why? Because
I agree with you that humanity
often does seek a peaceful resolution, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more with you later, but just for argument's sake here, why would war... I don't really find war justified in most cases, but why would war not be justified?
Well, no, I'm saying that, like, the very act of saying the words war is justified, yeah, because when you make an argument, you are presupposing a norm, a peaceful norm, and that contradicts with the proposition that war is justified, right? This is called a performative contradiction. It's like saying I am dead. The proposition I am dead. That statement doesn't really make any sense, because in order for me to make that statement, I have to have been alive. So it's like I am not alive, or like I am a ghost, or I am a car, whatever, I don't know. Basically, these statements make no sense by the very act of actually saying it, but essentially there is no possible way of arguing that war is justified, or else you run into a contradiction. Yeah, we're just doing our own thing right now.
I just have to disagree with it.
I know, but we're just doing our own thing right now.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I give you this though? I just know your opinion on this. Can I come back later and give you this and get your opinion on it?
Sure. I mean, if you want to give it to me now, I don't know.
Just later. This is my my political philosophy.
The Ten Commandments?
Yeah, I basically wrote my political philosophy in 10 easy steps. Everything.
Okay. I mean, okay.
I know you're doing your own thing. I did not mean to come.
No, it's okay. It's
But I
okay.
do want your opinion because I respect you
Sure.
intellectually. There are not that many people I respect intellectually to where I would go up and ask their opinion.
Okay, I appreciate it, man.
I did not mean to.
No, it's okay, because we're just like filming, that's why.
Oh, you're
Yeah,
filming?
yeah, that's why. No, it's okay, you don't know.
Oh, you're filming?
Yeah.
It's about time.
Yeah, trying to grow, you know?
You're gonna grow. I'm telling you, this is gonna be.
Thank you.
Did you get one of those permissions? It's not very easy because it's public.
Huh?
Yeah.
Do you need those
I don't wanna
forms?
say- I don't wanna say-
No, it's on like YouTube. It's on YouTube.
I mean, like, for filming.
Oh, no, you don't have to sign. You just have to sit down. You know, you just have to be like, hey, come sit down. You okay being filmed? You know, that's it. Yeah.
I'm arguing for you, asshole.
Wait, what happened? What did you do?
Oh no, just a friend of mine.
Oh, okay. I thought you did something. I mean, I'll hold on to it, but like,
You're doing it.
yeah,
Just 5 good. Keep 5 good when you think you'll be.
yeah, sure.
Just come back around 5 and give me.
Okay. Yeah.
You
Sure.
do not need a pro.
So yeah, so
Go on, sorry.
and in order to like argue, in order to make a proposition, you need to own yourself. You know, the very nature of like arguing and offering propositions and trying to discover truth also implicits self-ownership, because if you don't own yourself, then you can't argue, you can't offer propositions. So and then from self-ownership, we could derive, property rights in the sense that me using my body to use labor for an unknown resource, I take it from nature, that becomes mine. This is called homesteading or trading. I offer my labor, or I offer a product and we trade. That's also property rights. Or producing. So I would say that the only logical sound philosophy I would say is libertarianism and the ethics of libertarianism. But so that's rights. But now you said like what we do about the roads, about
Our collective organization society, regardless of your philosophy, we can all come to an agreement that what we have built now is almost nearly impossible to dismantle without creating a flux of chaos and destruction. If we were to disassociate everything that we see around here, we would fall into disarray much quicker than anybody would possibly happen. And something like this that can generate the vast amount of wealth that many homesteaders like yourself, that was incorrect for me to say, I'm sorry, that many often seek to see in their own personal gains and wealth that they want to seek away from the government would not be possible today without something like this. Right. The mega city of New York, the mega complex of New York City generates about $1.26 trillion worth of revenue. That's a lot of money to be made.
yeah.
And to facilitate that trade of goods and services, we need to be closer to. Oh, good, he's joining us. I'm sorry, he is very, very annoying.
He's a very quirky fella.
Oh, he's a very quirky fellow indeed. We can't really just disassociate, otherwise we would break the ability of ourselves to collect and generate wealth on such a scale such as this, and break it down individually upon each other in an organized fashion, which I guess would be the purpose of libertarianism, to be unorganized. But
Well, I mean, I would.
you wouldn't go so far as to say
I would contest that. Well, because like I don't.
unorganization or of wealth generation.
Well, I mean, I disagree with this idea that like people being free is just unorganized. It's all chaotic. It's all violent. Like as people think it is, because like they view the state as like law and order, as like necessary to control people. I would argue that the state itself is chaos. That the state itself is violent. The state itself is out of order. And I'm just looking at it's a little bent, but I would argue that people naturally form order spontaneously. Like for example, me and you, I would say that me and you, we have like an anarchist relationship in the sense that like neither of us has power over one another. Like me and you, like you're here because you want to, not because like I have like a gun to your head. We're trying to exchange ideas, and I believe that this is like basically like 99% of human interaction.
Hey, George.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would argue that the state, since it's a monopoly, since it acts through extortion, it acts through violence, I would argue that it lacks accountability, or if it has accountability, it's very piss poor accountability because it's a monopoly. Monopolies don't care about being limited, it doesn't care about being small. Man, there's so much traffic, planes, cars everywhere.
One of the biggest worries for you would be a monopoly forming, or monopolies forming of themselves and abusing the power that the state gives them.
Yeah, I would argue that monopolies that exist, like in terms of like business monopolies, they have backing of the state through regulations, taxes, bailouts, licenses that basically keeps out competitors in the marketplace.
So what exactly do you propose as a solution for the state? Which is what always kind of confused me when dealing with anarchists and libertarians, because not every libertarian is an anarchist and not every anarchist is a libertarian. So whenever I deal with anarchists, they always say the divulsion of the state and the creation of mutual aid communities of which like-minded individuals come together, which to me is the formation of the state.
Well, okay, so I would define the state as a monopoly on violence within a given territory. So I would say that if it's not a monopoly on violence, I wouldn't call that a state.
I would not call that a state, but a collective and organization of a group of individuals seeking to distribute power amongst themselves, because all human interaction, regardless of transaction, is power. What would you call that? That organization, if not a monopoly over violence, a monopoly over what?
So, are we referring to the state here, or?
Not the state, not let's say the federal government of the United States, but let's say if that just magically disappeared overnight and now me and you want to start our own little, like me and you are, let's say, like-minded individuals, we want to band together, we want to help each other as the anarchists want to go for in mutual aid societies. What is that direction? The direction is that it's not the state, it's not a collectivization, it's just, we're not even organized, but we are organized. Yeah. It's an organization of unorganized individuals, a collection of what I would call a state.
Okay, well, so if individuals want to get, well, so there is value in like cooperation, people coming together and cooperating, having markets, having charity, churches, etc. That's not like antithetical to anarchism. What's antithetical to anarchism is this idea that there's an entity that is the sole violent entity, that anyone else who uses violence is locked up in a cage, is being punished by law. It's the public that gives this specific entity the power to use violence, and anyone else does not. So I would only call that the state. But if there are people who want to come together, form like a marketplace, have like a community of people coming together. I mentioned mutual aid, but I also believe in like markets, free markets. People opening up businesses, people trading, people homesteading. That is what I'm fine with. I'm just not fine with like a specific one entity having violence and going around and killing people, stealing from people, etc.
So we've had something like this very similar, like in the past before, and that's why I feel like the state has generated to become to what was known as a modern nation state today. We have seen this before also, that the monopoly over violence, and that monopoly was not necessarily given to them by the rights of the people, but more so that it was taken by warlords. Let's say, I want to roll it back to, let's say, the right before 1066, before the Norman invasion of England, there were about 7 different Anglo-Saxon and Nordic kingdoms all across the British Isles. Each one of them their own little fiefdoms, kingdoms, and so on, and which in the authority of the crown was absolute, but a monopoly over violence there was not. As a collectivization of very similar individuals, they had different different non-organized, I don't really know how to describe them, non-organized collectives that would sort of wage war with each other on the premise of just sheer nonsense. Very minute disputes would result in violence being necessary. Like, oh, hey, your sheep just ate my grass. You are going to be stabbed for this. Goodbye. You are stealing my property. It's the reason why I think today, as we collectivize and we organize into the modern state that we know today, is that we forfeit our right to violence in the pursuit of the state, because we don't wish to deal with violence in and of ourselves. We wish the state to do it for us. We wish to automate, perform, and allow the state to do many different authoritative acts that we require, but on our behalf. It doesn't really work if we return that power back to us, specifically in our society today. We would not be as peaceful as we are now without the state, even if the state's direct violence and monopoly over violence affects us now.
Okay, so I mean, so a couple things there. I would say that like states throughout history have mostly, if not primarily, have formed through wars. Like states, like whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Africa, like. Sure. Yeah.
Call it. It's something by fire. Not trial by fire. I forgot the word for it, but yeah, but like basically born through combat. Yeah.
I mean, so I would say that. Yeah. I mean, like people have made like mistakes in the past, but I would say that our way of thinking, our way of understanding philosophy, our understanding of ethics has changed a lot throughout the years. I would say that the Enlightenment era is the thing that has given us the idea of like liberalism and the idea of like of a free market and individual rights and humanism. You know, so it is true that back then, like there were like wars everywhere. People were very, I would say, more barbaric. But I would say that a lot of that is because we were a little less intellectually like sound, like less intellectually understanding what is right and what is wrong. But also, I would argue there are also some like anarchist societies in the ancient times that I believe were successful, such as Acadia, which was a French colony in Nova Scotia during like 1650 to 1755. It was very capitalist, very religious, very Christian, and it was very prosperous. Now granted, it was technically ruled by the French and then ruled by the British. However, these governments basically was like hands off. They basically left them alone, and they grew a lot of wealth. They traded peacefully with the Indians. I forget what they're called, the Macaw Indians. I forget what they're called, but it was very peaceful. And they disappeared when the British decided to commit a genocide and basically kill like 60% of the population. I would argue because they were envious of their large wealth, and they were also intermarrying with the Indians as well. There's also examples of like ancient Ireland, ancient Iceland. Ancient Ireland had its own private legal system, and it lasted, I believe, like 400 years until the British took it over.
The British, the Romans, the Celts. The Celts have been around for thousands of years, and they've hated basically anybody that's touched the Isles. They've always had their own little quirks, as they would say. Yeah. And ancient Iceland also had its own like private legal system. They also had like a judge, like a private judge, that were like two people who were in conflict would look towards a third party to mediate their conflict. And the crime in ancient Iceland was comparable to the crime in the U.S. So that's amazing. That's and like, yes, granted, there was. When we think of like the ancient Iceland, we think of like a lot of violence, but compared to like other areas in the region, other areas like Nordic, it was more peaceful than other areas. I mean, Iceland was mostly there was no population on Iceland until the Nords came. So, do you have a specific timeline for that would be? Because I can't imagine, like, the population of Iceland is not really feasible for hundreds of years after, I would say, 1066. Like after the baseline between the birth of the modern day English society. and really the rest of history. It's one of the most important years of all time.
Yeah, so I believe it was from like 900 AD to 1270 or 1260.
The world as it is, like we are 8 billion people today. Back around 1066, we may have been around like 500 million to maybe 800 million at most. And that's like a very, very liberal estimate.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine crime being rampantly high in a center where most people would not be able to travel to. So I'm not really sure how that fits into the timeline.
Sure, but I mean, like my point is that like they developed like systems in order to like resolve conflict, and a woman being killed was basically like almost unheard of in ancient Iceland. There's also the example of Cospaia in Italy. There's also the example of the Wild West in America. I mean, yeah.
Well, the idea of the Wild West is actually kind of a fantasy. It's not really true. In fact, they're probably the most egregious acts of monopoly over violence of the state than anywhere else. They had extremely stringent gun laws. Settlements were not really free market societies. They were mostly just mining camps and mining towns, and that's really was about it. Most women did not get to go to the West until maybe the 1850s. It was a ghost town and basically work camps. Firearms were not permitted with almost anywhere the reaches of the far West, and the most libertarian ideas of the free range and the Wild West and the frontier would be off the scourges, like in the down south by Mexico and California, than it would be in Texas or Utah, Oklahoma, California. Can't speak. Basically, the most egregious libertarian fronts would be down by the California-Mexican border, the Texas-Mexican border, anywhere along those borderlines, because that would be patrolled by both the U.S. and Mexican borders. But within the actual Midwest itself and throughout the West itself, between Colorado, Utah, Oklahoma, they were just work camps. There was nothing there, and federal forces were driving Indians across the land to remove them so we can settle out there. They were deeply populated by Indian settlements, and we forced them off their lands, and federal troops and federal property was the forefront of the West, not individuals.
Yeah, so I would say that the five big cities of the Wild West had like very low rates of like violent crime. Like in like the 80 years it was like basically like 40 homicides in the five biggest cities. But also we also see that crime actually started to skyrocket when the government and its standing armies started to enter more into the West. But like also I want to say that people in the West, when the government basically was like more hands off in the West, there was actually more peace with the Indians. They traded. There was agreements as well. Granted, it wasn't perfect, but it got worse when the government got more and more and more involved.
Well, that was about the time when Andrew Jackson took power, and I don't know how you feel about Andrew Jackson, but
mixed. I mean, I support his like anti-big government mindset. I wouldn't support his like anti-Indian mindset.
A lot of his small government libertarian ideas originally stem from the idea of what is known as the white man's republic. Taking the idea that all men are created equal, that everything like our basic constitutional rights and humanism in and of itself is only granted to the in-group, people like you and me, and everybody in the out-group, politically motivated women, slaves, blacks, and anything of the sort. And the Indians specifically also was one of Jackson's biggest targets. Anybody within the out-group, these rights did not extend. But in the in-group, these rights were irrevocable and were necessary to continue the prospect of society and liberty. Which is my main beef with Jackson. Jackson did fight for small government and for small time action and for more liberal rights, but did not extend to anybody else but us. That's my beef with Jackson. Our unequivocal rights to freedom were not passed down to anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be like, I'm not like a huge fanboy of Andrew Jackson.
No, but I'm just like giving more of an in-depth idea of why I personally I'm not a very big fan of Jackson.
Just give me 1 second. I just want to see if it's still recording.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So actually, I do want to ask you a question.
Sure. Oh, you also mentioned like
If you want to.
healthcare that you also. Well, yeah, you just.
Yeah, we get to healthcare a little bit later on. I'm going to stay on for maybe another 10 or 15 more minutes. What is your view on the Confederate States or the Confederacy? Basically, just I guess the Civil War as a whole. Not like the actions of our government specifically, but like breaking off into their own rights. What is your depiction of the Confederate States?
Yeah, cool. I love talking about Civil War. So I'm a huge fan of secession in the first place, and I believe secession.
But why? Why are you a very big fan of secession? What is appealing of secession to you?
Yeah, so I mean, I look at the secession as it is itself a check on government.
Working on it, bro.
I would call secession as one of the checks on government, as like leaving, as like a separation of powers, as democracy. I call secession as one of those checks on power, because I'm
sorry.
Sure. Sure, yeah. So I would say that since the government, like basically there's like no government to my knowledge that gives people the right to secede, and I would argue because it is probably the most powerful check on government power.
Well, there is actually, just as a side point, we are a federation which does not grant us the right to secede, but you'll notice that many different Indian tribes and different Indian organizations are known as confederacies. By legal definition, those are federal organizations that do allow for secession and removal. The EU, for example, is not a federation; it's a confederation. The European Union.
Oh, the European Union.
Yeah, is a confederation, not a federation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that one's a weird one. That one's, I mean, I would say the EU has a lot less influence than like the federal government does on states.
Yeah. Until I eventually suppose that one day Europe will just join into one giant federation or one giant unified government. Yeah. Perhaps a new Soviet Union, perhaps another United States. Who knows? But that's what I propose Europe is eventually going to lead towards.
Yeah. But yeah. So yeah, about the Confederacy, right? So So my view with the Confederacy is like mixed. Obviously, like I'm not a fan of slavery. Slavery, it to me is unethical because it violates the principles that I believe in, the non-aggression principle, property rights, self-ownership. But I would say that I am in huge favor of states seceding peacefully, and I don't believe that the federal government had any right to invade the South and attack the seceding states. Secession is itself peaceful, right? It's states formed the Union voluntarily. It was a compact. The 13 states, they joined together voluntarily, and because it was a voluntary agreement, I would say that it also follows that it's a peaceful. They have a peaceful right to secede from it.
Not really. The Constitutional Convention doesn't really provide more so details on state secession. And if you go by the Supreme Court, obviously it seems a little bit more rigged in the favor of the Union, which I personally admit is a little bit fair. But
I think it's nonsense.
Yeah, we'll move on to that. But and during the Constitutional Convention, the idea of states seceding and the right to withhold from secession would basically undermine the entire exercise of the Constitution. The Articles of Confederation have pretty much failed the country as a whole by not being strong enough as a union and no central authority to keep the states in check before each one of their governments fell. Madison was a very big proponent of the compound union. States did not have the right to secede in his mind, and as they adopted the Constitution, only allowing the right to secede would only basically be equivalent to allowing states to basically pick and choose what parts of the Constitution they wanted to follow, which would basically just be a repetition of what the Articles of Confederation would eventually become. That was the whole point of the Constitution. It was supposed to be kept within the boundaries of the Union and to be kept within a period of forever. You were never supposed to secede. Seceding would basically say, all right, well, I'd rather just follow this one than that one, and if I don't feel like it's fine, then never mind. It defeats the entire purpose of voicing our opinions of how we should run a centralized unified state. Which, as a federation, we're not really a unified state per se. We are a collection of what was once sovereign, now unified into one sovereignty, one sovereign state. Yeah. But yeah. My argument with the Confederacy and proponents of the Confederacy and their rights to secession was obviously that the states were fighting to secede for one reason and one reason alone: their property rights of slaves. everyone often goes along with the Corbin Amendment to say, if the Civil War wasn't about slavery, why did the Southern states just ratified the Corbin Amendment? The problem with the Southern states and slavery was not just that they wanted to protect slavery where it was. They wanted to expand slavery. The planter class was a very influential part of American society for a very long time, and it wasn't until really the invention of the cotton gin in the 1800s that really slavery began to become one of the most lucrative prospects in American history. You could buy any plot of land that you want, save up, let's say, about 2-3 years of your revenue, and purchase someone to work your land for the rest of their entire lives. You can force them to breed with one another and create more wealth for you. It was an insane system, and that is morally and reprehensibly evil. Yes. Which you don't disagree with me, and obviously I'm not saying that you do agree with me.
I have some disagreements.
Right, but what is the ultimate and the funniest thing about the Confederacy is that they had the most restrictions on civil liberties than anybody would ever imagine. You were not permitted to travel within the Confederate States. You were not permitted. You had to declare yourself a loyal citizen of the state unless you would be arrested as a traitor. They performed the first conscription in American history. They even wanted to go so far as to expand not only the institution of slavery between property holders, but just create the idea of what is known as a petition republic. The idea that these planters, with their increasingly vast amounts of wealth and land value, would dominate everybody, not just the slaves of the South, but whites, Anglo-Saxons, or anybody they deemed inferior to them on the same level as they would the slaves, which is the biggest contradiction of the Confederacy itself. We often pose it as this shining beacon of freedom and libertarianism, but really it's one of the most constrictive and most insane strangleholds on civil liberties ever proposed.
Well, I mean, I'm not a statist in the first place. I don't care about like what. I don't appeal to specific states about what's my ideal freedom. So this idea that states went to war because of slavery, that's true for some states.
No, it's true for all of them.
Well, no, because so you're referring to the documents, right? That say that the cause of secession, or whatever it's called, I forgot what it's called.
Well, one, if you have to look very firmly into not first the Confederate Constitution, it states clear as day. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. I believe it's Article 2, Section 8, if I'm not mistaken.
Of the what?
Of the Confederate Constitution.
Okay.
That Federal Constitution. There shall be no law passed in either house abolishing the enslavement of Negroes in these Confederate states.
But I wouldn't say that in and of itself is the reason for all of the states seceding, though.
They are planter-based.
What's your evidence?
My evidence is their economies, all the revenue of which they generated.
That's not evidence.
Yeah, that is evidence. That is absolutely evidence. Take the North, for example. We industrialized in a very similar fashion that the South wanted to industrialize themselves. We industrialized using immigrants and our own subservient subclasses that came to America later on in their lives. The South had a monopoly over their underclass, the slaves. Their economy was that of a planter-based economy. Their primary source of revenue and their property rights were that of their land and their slaves. If they didn't have slaves to work their land, they have to have something to perform their labor. They had their fight for slavery was their right for property, their right to property to own people.
Yeah, sure. I'm not saying that slavery was not a part of it, but like I don't. There's no evidence, as far as I'm aware, that every state fought because of slavery.
Two states in and of themselves specifically, which I know is...
Yes, I agree. Yes. I agree, but I'm just saying not all of them.
State secession documents in and of themselves already outlined that they were fighting for slavery.
Yes.
But as a whole, as a collective bloc, the Southern planter class had a stranglehold of property rights and values in the Southern political sphere, and their rights to property were enshrined into one idea: the right to hold slaves and expand slavery even further. If they were allowed to secede and allowed to keep going with their ideas and ethics, we could see Atlanta, we could see New Orleans, we can see many of these southern cities industrialized much like New York and Chicago did, But instead of using immigrant labor and cheap immigrant labor, they would be using free labor of the slaves that they physically owned.
Which was inefficient, by the way.
Not at all, actually.
It was inefficient. Using slavery is much more inefficient than using free labor. Yeah, well, free labor in the sense of like free movement of labor. I don't want this to fall over. But even Adam Smith himself, in his Wealth of Nations, said that he found that the people who were free in the industrial North were much more productive than the slavery.
Our giving us rights and privileges makes more productive citizens, but when you can force someone against their will to do your bidding, it's nearly as efficient.
No, it is inefficient. It's very inefficient. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, it is profitable, but being profitable is not efficient. I would say that if there was a lot of laws by the state that actually protected slavery, both state and federal. The federal government had the Constitution Clause of the Slave Clause, for instance, and in the Fugitive Slave Act that essentially enforces that clause.
Wait, which Fugitive Slave Act are you enforcing? Are you talking about the compromise during the Constitutional Convention or the one from 1850?
The 1851.
Okay. Do you want to hear another little ditty about the Fugitive Slave Act about 1850 and how it's a very, very bad preposition on how it protected slave owners? In theory, the Fugitive Slave Law did two things, of 1850 did two things. One, it denied suspected runaways a right to a fair trial, which means that any black American in any state whatsoever could be black bagged and enslaved in American society, which is, again, I guess part of your argument would be one of the worst influences. And
It's very statist, yeah.
yeah, it'd probably be one of your best arguments, actually.
But also, they also said that states were forced to give back escaped slaves.
Yes, they had to.
Which is also a violation of states' rights as well.
But a protection of property rights.
Well, but
It is. It would, no matter how you look at it, it is a guaranteed protection of your property rights to your escaped property.
But they weren't property to begin with.
They were property. They were considered property. Slaves were not considered to be citizens. They were considered property. They were considered something to be bought and sold as commodities.
Yes, but
as I would buy and sell this watch, I would buy and sell this person.
Yeah, but if I said the sky is red, and I tried to convince people that the sky is red, it doesn't mean that the sky is red.
No, but that'd be your ethics that slavery is wrong, not the reality and truth behind you that we are currently doing what we're doing.
I'm just saying that slavery was always wrong, even if there was like people who didn't understand.
Yeah, no one's saying here that slavery was good and justified. I know no one is ever claiming that, but it is a truth and reality that slavery is the enshrined right to property of which this country was fighting for so long. And it doesn't matter if you say that it's a moral and reprehensible evil, it doesn't matter. It's the truth around you is that slavery enshrined your right to property of people and that you may own a person to do what you want them to do.
Okay, but my point is that the state enforced a law that basically forced people back into slavery. That's all I was saying. Yeah. But also, there's also state laws like the anti-manumission laws, which basically said that if the slave owner died, the slaves weren't freed. Like, it was illegal for that to happen. And it was also illegal for slave owners to educate their slaves. So there was like a bunch of these laws, and it was also I would argue that the slave trade abolition under Thomas Jefferson, I would argue economically that it actually incentivizes slave breeding, because what?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The banning of importation of slaves was a very big concern at the Constitutional Convention. Many southern states wouldn't join the Constitutional Convention unless that specific clause was added in. That during the Constitutional Convention, one of the compromises made with the southern states was that at the beginning, at the adoption and the ratification of the Constitution, that the importation of slaves would not be banned for 20 years. Yeah. Once Jefferson came into office, Congress swept right in, swung its hammer down, and said, "Fuck that." Banned the importation of slaves, and you're absolutely right. It did create a market of breeding and expanding the internal market of slavery.
And look at the Supreme Court decision, the Dred Scott decision as well. That also helped empower slavery.
Yeah, no, the United States is also as guilty of the same sin as the Confederate States are. Anyone who says otherwise is an idiot.
Yeah, but like I'm just like my general point is that slavery itself had a lot of protection from the government. Had the government not gotten involved in slavery, I would argue it would have withered away on its own, especially with like innovation, with the tractor that would come in like the 1870s, I believe.
I would argue without the federal government as well, we wouldn't really have the ability to gain enough capital and enough momentum to actually begin more innovations that become widespread. I believe the state provides a marketplace for all, regulatory or non-regulatory. It provides a marketplace for all to share on a single continuous plane. We are all United States citizens, you and I, both of us. We can do business in America. That's what gives us our right to do so. And it gives us certain protections that allow us to do our business here and to innovate and to improve. That's what the general idea of the free market would be, is that we always want to constantly improve.
But like I would say that that's kind of like an illusion, because like there's a lot of, because like I could barely do a lot of stuff. I need like permission from the state for a lot of things. Like I can't, for instance, I can't charge any amount I want on labor. Like if I was an employer, I have to follow the law of the state or the federal government. Well, federal government is like $7.55, but then the states have their own minimum wage, which I would argue minimum wage is a violation of property rights, because I should be able to charge whatever I want, just as I buy like flags or a flag buy a phone. I should be able to charge whatever I want for labor as well. I mean, that's just one example. There's like many examples.
Yeah.
Like licenses.
Well, licenses are a form of contract between you and the state.
Yeah, but like I need permission from the state in order to like do business.
But there are certain things that you would definitely require a license for, and that you wouldn't want just any Joe Schmo to have. Would you want your dog to be some free market cheap person that says, "Yeah, I can cut you open. I might kill you"?
Sure. I mean, like, yeah. So okay. So my thing with licenses, I would say that. Okay, I'm not a fan of government licenses. However, I do support a license system to develop spontaneously in the private sector. I would argue that had the government stepped away, the private sector would develop its own systems of quality assurance, as it is right now. Actually, we already have systems of quality assurance, whether it's insurance companies, whether it's like reviews, whether it's private companies that review products and their safety, like the Underwriters Laboratory, which is a private company that reviews products and looks at if it's safe, if it's not safe, and it the business pays the Underwriters Laboratory. Like if you look at like a product, it might have like the U at it in the back of it. That's the symbol for the Underwriters Laboratory. It's approved by the company that it's safe. But yeah, there'll be like a lot of systems to ensure quality for the consumer if the consumer desired it. But with regards to doctors, it was the AMA, the American Medical Association, in the 1900s that would lobby every single state to ensure that doctors would be licensed. And I would argue this isn't because of some concern of quackery, some concern of doctors doing some shady stuff, but it's to increase their wages. It's to shorten the supply of doctors, means driving up the wages. Now, in more recent years, since like the past few decades, it's been a lot better, but in the 1900s, there's a lot of evidence that points that it was because they were trying to purposely decrease the supply of doctors, and they also controlled the med schools as well, which again, they lobbied the government to have the power to control med schools. This is a private company that used the power of government to remain a monopoly, and they basically approve med schools. They basically have like a national quota of doctors. They basically say like how many doctors are allowed to be in the nation. And I would argue this again decreases the number of doctors, drives up healthcare prices. The two most expensive spending in healthcare is doctors and hospitals.
Right.
People think it's drugs. Not drugs. Nowhere close.
No, drugs are also. I'm a farm tech, so I see the amount that we charge for drugs, and believe you me, they are not. They are nowhere near the price that there should be. But
yeah, sure.
You are correct. Drugs are a very close third. I wouldn't say they're at the bottom of the list, but drugs are a very close third. Sure. Doctors and hospitals are ridiculously out of control, and you are right. The American Medical Association is 100% at fault for limiting the supply of doctors and licensing, structure, and registrations. There's also another factor at play here. Insurance companies. are another major source of problems in driving up the price of healthcare. Private organizations that have a monopolistic control over the field, that don't really have much government oversight and regulation until the Obama era. And this really spawned throughout the 1950s, when nations were deciding whether we should go for private healthcare or nationalized healthcare. Most of Europe was bombed to shit to World War II, so they said it's not really worth just doing anything private anymore. We don't really have any other alternatives, and no one really has the capital to do anything. We have to go public with this. Yeah. The Americans were fine. We have no issues. We weren't bombed to shit. Our infrastructure was fine. In fact, we were just handing out cash left and right to whoever wanted it. During the 1950s, we saw a massive increase in the rise of insurance companies as a means to, help you cover the basic costs of medical care. These insurance companies began demanding massive discounts because now they had multiple millions of people under their care and system. They were doctors, hospitals, and other such things had to meet their demand prices and meet discounts for these insurance companies. One of the ways in which they did was increasing the price on their charge lists for their services. Yeah. A basic dose of, let's say, ibuprofen 600, a basic drug that has been manufactured since the dawn of time, at a hospital in 1950 would run you maybe around 30 cents at the high end in 1950. Yeah. That same dosage of a couple pills of ibuprofen from the hospital pharmacy to you, from the doctor administering it, whatever you want, is now $60. Yeah. Why is that? Because insurance companies get a massive discount due to the number of millions of patients, and they get a massive discount. The increase in prices they demanded for their discounts, they had to show corporate responsibility and corporate revenue increasing. Yep. They didn't want to spend as much as they could on patients. Their discounts were heavy, so in order for hospitals to still make a profit and to still keep themselves in business in the private market, they had to overcharge everybody else who didn't have insurance.
Yeah, give me one second. I just want to check if it's still recording, because it's under the sun and it might be getting hot. Okay, it still has battery. Okay.
I'm gonna give you another 5 more minutes and then I have to head out of here.
Okay, cool. So insurance companies. I'm not a big fan of the insurance companies, and it's not because I'm all of a sudden anti-capitalist or whatever. Right. But I would consider that insurance companies, in referring to healthcare insurance companies, I would say is not a free market, and I would argue that the development of insurance into healthcare, because actually there was a point where we didn't even have insurance in healthcare. It was basically pay as you go, cash.
Exactly. Doctor saw you. You said, "Hi, how are you? My arm's broken. Great. Let me see it. All right. Here's a cast. $12. Yeah. Have a great day. Bye." Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it was much cheaper as well. But I would argue that insurance came about because since the 1940s and 50s. So you had the Blue Cross and Blue Shield that came about as a monopoly, backed by government. Blue Cross and Blue Shield were given special monopoly privileges that other insurance companies would not get. Number one. Number two, there was also the World War II spending, which there's actually, I forget what it's called, the Stabilization Act of 1942 or 52, but it was basically a law, a price control on labor. And what this did is if I wanted to hire a worker, I couldn't just offer him a higher wage. It was all controlled by the government. It was all wages and prices were controlled because of inflation, because of all this spending in the economy due to the war. And in effect, businesses found a way around it. What they started doing is offer healthcare benefits instead. Which was also with unions wanted that as well, but this was basically a way for them to offer them a wage. I mean, it wasn't really a wage, but it was a way to compete with other businesses in hiring workers. Right. And what has happened is that we started to create this incentive for more employment, employer provided insurance. And then the IRS saw this, and they're like, "What the hell? It's not being taxed. We need to start taxing this because it wasn't taxed." People were like, "Hell, hold on, IRS. This has been going on for 10 years. We're used to it." It was a whole ordeal, and the IRS decided, you know what? Fine, we will put in the books that healthcare benefits will be tax exempt from income. So now people have more of an incentive to get healthcare benefits from their work because it's now tax exempt. It's much cheaper than having insurance of themselves. Having the employer buy them insurance is now much more profitable. So now you develop this system over time of by the way, insurance companies love this.
Of course.
The government has created a system in which now people have more of an incentive for the employer to just buy up all this insurance for their employees. And I would argue this also creates really bad incentives in the marketplace because people aren't even buying insurance; it's their employer buying it for them, and it creates this whole really bad because in order for a market to work, consumers have to actually go there and buy it themselves, but the employer is buying it for them, and it creates this whole bad structure. It's like the employer buys the insurance covers them. It's like basically we create a system where the consumer is away from the marketplace of the healthcare. Sorry, I know you have to go soon.
I'm actually about to get up. Yeah, I wanted to interrupt you before you were done speaking.
And also we also have Medicare and Medicaid since the 1965.
Right.
Ever since then, you saw healthcare prices skyrocket.
Well, now you have the public competing with the private, and I personally believe it has to be one or the other.
I support a free market, but my point in all this is that we don't have a free market healthcare, despite what people say.
Well, yeah, we have regulations, but
And subsidies, a lot of subsidies.
Lots of subsidies. Yeah, the government loves its subsidies, but I personally believe in the public healthcare market. I think one of the industries that should not exist anymore is a private insurance company. Yeah, you can disagree with me all you want, and I'm going to disagree with you all I want.
That's fine.
Yeah. To me, the idea of a private insurance company in today's day and age, especially in a country that spends as much as it does on its own military and monopoly on violence, it can do the exact same for its citizenry. So, if every other single developed nation on Earth has it, there is no reason why we cannot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is my piece for now. I hope to find you again.
Awesome. I mean, we disagree on a lot, but I feel like we learn a lot as well.
100%.
It was a great talk. I'm gonna post it on YouTube.
Oh, very good. What's your name?
Christian.
Maurice.
Brace.
Yep.
BRACE.
No, Maurice.
Oh, Morris. Okay,
Yeah.
Morris.
Yes.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah, so you're posting on YouTube. What's your channel's name?
So it's called